Welcome back, Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950, DougPagittRadio.com. Religious radio that's not quite right. A little Sunday afternoon delight. And it's Halloween edition, so I couldn't be happier than to have Scott Poole with us. Scott is the author of the book Monsters in America, and with a subtitle, Our Historic Obsession with the Hideous and the Haunting. Scott, calling in from South Carolina, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a great time of year to be talking about monsters.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm sure you had to push to meet deadline to get the book out by Halloween, huh?
Actually, it was finished quite a while ago, but I do have to admit that we did sort of hold on to the book to let it go in October.
Yeah, then they held it. Now, Scott, you are a professor at the College of Charleston in South Carolina,
right.
And you've decided to write a book about monsters. And I'm sure that when people hear, when you have to say to them on an airplane or something like, "Well, I'm an author and I've written a book on monsters," you must get a couple of responses from people, huh?
Several. The first is always, is there stuff about zombies in it?
Is that right?
And it's so much so that I've told people before that I sort of wish I had made the subtitle, yes, there is stuff about zombies and vampires in the book. But yeah, I mean, people are always interested. They're interested to talk about sort of their favorite horror movies.
Yeah.
And then sort of interested to try to figure out, I think for me, why are you as a historian interested in these kinds of things?
Right,
so
right.
Have some great conversations.
Because I'd imagine there's sort of two parts to you. There's the trained historian side of you that wants to look at cultural development and how it has influenced our past and our future. And then there's also the little kid side of you that you've been able to bring together in this book.
And there's the third side that is the hipster professor that rides his bike to work and has a big dog.
Wow, I'm far more multifaceted than I thought that I was.
That's
after
right.
Hearing that.
Hey, Carrie Miller won't bring that up tomorrow on NPR.
Yeah, I don't know if you know with your very busy schedule, but you're going to be on the local national public radio station tomorrow morning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to that.
And if you want to name drop, well, yesterday on the Doug Pagitt radio show, that would be.
Yeah, I will absolutely.
We're going to try not to act like we're giving them our sloppy seconds over there, on the big NPR station. Now, I'm really interested in this book because I think that you're not just talking about sort of a pop cultural fascination with monsters and the hideous and scary, but you're trying to say, look, that subculture, that conversation plays a role in our broader society.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think sometimes people think it's primarily a film book that deals with the 20th century, but in fact I go all the way back to the earliest period of American settlement and talk about how monster tales informed early settlement, discovery, formation of the nation, the Civil War era, and then all the way up into the 20th century where I do look at films as primary sources. I mean, in a way, that's where the horror nerd and the professor come together for me. Is that those are historical sources in the sense that they're reflective of the times. A lot of people are going to see films, and I think they sort of tap into the public consciousness. For my purposes, they tap into public nightmares in certain kinds of ways.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that, because you're quoted as saying that every historic period decides what its monsters will be and creates the monsters it needs.
Yes,
talk a little bit about that.
I think that at least one aspect of the monster, and there's a lot of different aspects. I'm careful in the book not to limit my monsters. I think they have a lot of different meanings and actually kind of create.
Not to mention that it really ticks them off when you do that.
Right.
Yes, they do.
If you leave a monster out, you got nothing but trouble.
Deal with a monster. Yeah. Which in a way is kind of a part of the message of the book, really. That every historical era has had sort of a history of horror, and Americans have either faced that or chosen to ignore that. One of the sort of political edges I think that the book has is that I'm really trying to do what a number of historians have done, but just in a different way, really sort of hold up some of the more gruesome aspects of American historical experience, especially aspects that maybe sometimes have been ignored in sort of traditionalist and often conservative tellings of American history.
Yeah, and you suggest that like the witch trials, the witches kind of came out of a Puritan experience,
Sure.
and that the frontier monsters of sea monsters and people who had to travel in the frontier in the sea, that they would develop a sense of monsters, and then serial killers and Cold War monsters, and then the aliens, the fear of aliens sort of developed while technology was saying we should go to the moon. That you were sort of bringing together as a historian, almost an anthropologist, this sensibility that human beings are afraid of things, and that we have to have a narrative in which we can defeat those scary monsters that exist in our world. So in some ways, this kind of almost childish-like narrative of monsters and scary ghosts and goblins and so on really plays a larger cultural role for us.
It does. I mean, I'm trying really hard to get people to take their monsters seriously and to take American monsters seriously, and not to see them as simply sort of a marginal kind of entertaining part of American cultural history, but really really central in certain kinds of ways. I guess in a sense I almost see the monster as kind of a code breaker in a way.
Yeah, nice.
Sort of, looking at the terrors of a particular period, a particular period's monster, and then seeing the real terrors that are underneath that.
Well, then let me ask you, what do you think it is about the zombie narrative and perhaps the vampire narrative, but for sure that zombie narrative, that has made it so tantalizing currently? Like, there were zombies around in the 60s and 50s and so on, but boy, they sure seem to be the hitting the kind of cultural place right now. What do you think's up with that? Why zombies right now in this kind of cultural situation we find ourselves in?
Well, a couple of things I'd say about that. I mean, one, as you point out, there is kind of a longer trajectory here. I mean, they sort of begin to be popular in the post-Vietnam War era. And I actually think that the Vietnam mentality, sort of the post-Vietnam sense of the body that has been gored and destroyed and outraged, that Americans actually watched on their TVs every night. I actually think that did play, and in fact I talk about in the book how that played a really direct role in the development of the zombie genre, in the sense that the great makeup artist Tom Savini, who worked with Romero on films after Night of the Living Dead and a lot of other horror films, Savini was actually a combat photographer in Vietnam,
really?
and has actually said that some of the things that he saw, he then recreated in his special effects makeup shop. So actually there's a sense in which in some of those zombie films of the 70s and 80s, we are actually seeing Vietnam in a very real kind of way. So there's that, and then I think that it's reached kind of this, fever pitch of zombie apocalypse in the last few years. I mean, just with growing intensity, because of a real fascination in our culture with the possibility of complete social breakdown. What would it be like, is really what we're asking, if there really was this total social apocalypse, where everything that we sort of depend on for stability and security just sort of goes away. And zombies have been an very effective way, I think, to have that kind of public conversation.
Now, I went and saw a movie a few years ago called Zombieland, which was sort of a comedic version of this. Yeah,
Bill Murray.
And I said to these couple of my knuckleheady friends I was with, I'm like, okay, I think there's something bigger going on in this whole zombie genre that is reflecting of our cultural situation. And, they gave me that look, maybe like you often get when you try to bring that up with people.
Professors are used to that look, actually, like every day.
Is it hard to transition people into taking, because there's kind of a fanciful, hey, we all know those aren't real sort of response. Is it hard to take, for people to take these cultural commentary seriously for out of this narrative?
I think sometimes there is, and it's from several different perspectives. I think some of my more traditionalist colleagues in the profession really probably find sort of a history of monsters and often cultural history in general a little less serious, and don't necessarily see the usefulness of it. I'm less interested in them, frankly, in a way than in
As
in
are
horror
your
fans
students. Yeah.
who often also sort of say, could you just leave me the hell alone with my popcorn and let me watch my movie?
Right.
Just let me have the entertainment. Don't ruin it for me.
Well, and I guess in some ways what you're saying in the book is, look, someone doesn't need to describe the way you're able to do what the role of these narratives are. They're still happening, whether or not the commentator mentions them. They still have that powerful effect.
They're still there, and there is still a reason that they are entertaining at a particular moment. Like, there's a reason why we care about zombies now when we didn't care about them before. It's a little bit like the experience of, often when some, especially younger horror fans, watch some of the classic stuff from the 1930s and 40s. I mean, their first comment is, I don't get it. This is not scary. Frankenstein is not scary. Bela Lugosi is not really scary.
That's
it's not
right.
scary like Hostel or Saw is.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, I think that kind of proves the point that our monsters are always constructions of the historical moment, and that there's a reason why those things were scary then and maybe are less so now.
Because people were already afraid of that Frankenstein reality, and then this character plays that image.
I think there's some of that. I think also just the narratives are tapping into different kinds of historical experiences that people are nervous about.
Oh, I love it.
And they're sort of pulling, they're sort of pulling different kinds of strings in different decades of American history.
Great. Well, Scott, can you hang on with us? Because I want to chat with you a little bit more about this after the break. That's Scott Poole. His book is called Monsters in America. You can buy it everywhere, and you should. Go pick it up here this afternoon, order it on Amazon. And you can find him at monstersinamerica.com as well, and over on the Doug Pagitt radio page on Facebook. So stick with us, folks, here after the break, and we'll chat a little bit more with author Scott Poole on AM 950 and DougPagittRadio.com.